In 2009, two new challengers joined the ranks of World Superbike racing, Aprilia and BMW. Italian manufacturer Aprilia, with a long and storied history in 125 and 250cc two-stroke GP racing, was returning to the glamour class of World Superbike after a 6-year hiatus. Germany's BMW was using the Superbike class to launch its first assault on the modern sports bike market. Both teams had thrown the kitchen sink in behind their championship effort. Each had designed and built a brand new motorcycle with the specific intention of getting race results as fast as possible. Aprilia fielded its gorgeous new RSV4 and BMW its fearsome S1000RR. With the full weight of BMW's R&D resources, plus the technical know-how of its Formula One team to draw upon, most people expected BMW to draw first blood in the battle of the newcomers, but that wasn't the way it turned out. Instead, the Aprilia RSV4, piloted by Roman bad boy Max Biaggi, stormed its way home to a 4th place finish in the 2009 championship, beating out the best of Honda and Suzuki and making mincemeat of the BMW effort. Biaggi's Aprilia took 1 win, 4 seconds, 4 thirds, and 1 fastest lap throughout the season. He was only beaten in the championship by Hager and Fabrizio on Ducati 1198s and the season champion Ben Spies on his Yamaha R1. So it's fair to say that the new Aprilia took the World Superbike grid by surprise, an astonishing success given that it's a brand new bike competing against well-understood Japanese and Italian machines that have enjoyed decades of evolution. But what makes the RSV4 so special? Well, firstly you could point to its brand new V4 engine. V4 and V5 engines have been the most successful format in MotoGP in recent years. That's partially because they're so narrow and compact that you can design a bike with a tiny frontal aerodynamic profile. It's also partially because a compact engine helps you centralise and position mass in the frame, which is essential for quick and light handling. And it's partially because you can use your extra horizontal space to bore out your cylinders and make them as oversquare as you like. And oversquare engines can rev faster and harder with less rotating crankshaft mass than longer stroke motors. Honda has historically had a lot of success with V4 road bike engines, notably the VFR 800, the world's biggest selling sports touring bike of the last decade and a half. But it's been a long time since there's been a genuine V4 supersports bike on the market, and the current recurring recipe of inline-4 Japanese sports bikes and a few exotic V-twins has left many of us hoping for some more interesting alternatives. Honda did end up developing a brand new V4 engine for 2010, but the new VFR 1200 is a touring bike with no racing pretensions, so Aprilia's choice to go racing with a production V4 has got people very excited. The RSV4 engine is a 65-degree V4, displacing 999.6 cubic centimetres. As early as October 2007, there were 4 versions of this engine undergoing bench testing for reliability, the weakest of which was making 185 horsepower, and the strongest of which was pumping out 220. The RSV4 is specified as 180 horsepower minimum in road trim. Let's put that in context. That's about the same amount of power that the 2010 Volkswagen Polo GTI sports hatch puts out. But the Polo weighs nearly 6 times more than the RSV4. Scary stuff. The RSV4's valve timing system is designed to help keep the engine super compact. The cam chain only drives the intake camshafts, which themselves drive the exhaust cams through a gear mechanism. The cassette gearbox shows another peek at the RSV4's pure racing DNA. You can pull it straight out and slot in another gearbox with different ratios to suit a particular racetrack. And the Sweet Action slipper clutch is only there for one thing, banging down through the gears from stratospheric speeds as you approach a hairpin. If you ride the RSV4 within the road rules, you'd never know the slipper clutch was there. There's no throttle cables on the RSV4. The bike uses a fly-by-wire electronic throttle management system, similar to what Yamaha pioneered on its 2006 R6 Supersport bike. Rather than having the throttle butterflies directly operated by a cable connected to the twist grip, the Aprilia's twist grip actually sends an electronic signal to the bike's ECU computer, which evaluates the throttle opening against a whole raft of other information before it decides exactly how hard you really want to accelerate. One of the benefits of this system is that you can design multiple engine maps to make the most of the bike in different riding conditions. The RSV4 road bike gives you 3 options. The full fat track mode, which gives you very direct throttle response and the full 180 horsepower in every gear. The sports mode, which eases off the power delivery and limits the torque in the first 3 gears to make it a bit easier to control. And the road mode, which tames the raging V4 beast down to a very manageable 140 horsepower if it all starts feeling like a bit too much. Which, believe me, it can, but more on that later. Let's move on to the chassis. Aprilia has traditionally made some of the best handling sports bikes the world has ever seen. The incredibly light RS125 and 250 two-stroke race replica road bikes took pure cornering precision and bliss to levels we may never see again since two-strokes have gone the way of the dinosaurs. The RSV Meal V-twin routinely stunned road and track testers with its outstanding chassis, so Aprilia had nothing to prove and everything to build upon when it started designing the RSV4. What it came out with, however, was beyond what anyone imagined. The single most race-focused chassis ever used on a road bike. The RSV4 factory has an almost absurd amount of chassis tuning options. You can pop out spacer rings in the steering head assembly to adjust the rake and trail of your forks. You can change the position of the swing arm pivot, and if you're really keen, you can even change the position of where the entire engine sits in the frame. That's a far cry from the suspension clickers on your typical sports bike. So, with the RSV4 factory, you're given an unprecedented ability to change the bike's geometry and handling fundamentals in search of the perfect ride for any racetrack. It'd be a fascinating educational exercise to play with these options in isolation, but to be honest, it handles so well in stock form, you'd have to be mad, or at least a top-level racer, or both, to want to change anything. If you get the completely non-adjustable version, the RSV4R, and take it out through the fast sweepers, you'll discover an exceptionally balanced, composed and responsive handling package. Its narrow clip-on handlebars take a little more effort to steer in than some of the competition, but the short wheelbase and compact dimensions of this bike seem almost to straighten the corners out for you, encouraging you to go in deeper and harder each time, and really giving you the tiniest glance at the bike's limits. The ergonomics are fairly sporty, but because the bike is so compact, it's not too far of a reach to the bars. The seat is wide and it doesn't start to feel planky for at least a couple of hours, and despite the bike being almost comically tiny, there's a surprising amount of room to move around. The front brakes, radially mounted Brembo monoblock calipers with steel braided lines and a radial master cylinder, are just as powerful and controllable on the RSV4 as they are on the Ducati 1198 and KTM RC8R. They suck speed away at a breathtaking rate as the fully adjustable Showa forks mash your front tyre into the road. It's worth noting as well that they're a little bit less bitey here than on some other bikes, so you don't get that initial grab as you get on the brakes, which is quite nice. It's just as well the brakes are so good because the RSV4's power is truly prodigious and more than enough to get you into all sorts of sticky situations. Leave it in second gear for the tighter stuff, click up to third for faster sweepers, and you'll fire out of every bend with a savage V4 drone that reminds you instantly of Valentino Rossi's M1. Dance on the gear lever a little more and the power feels damn near unlimited. The sound is absolutely incredible as well for a stock exhaust. That's because of a cheeky little butterfly valve that gives you one very civilised and legal exhaust note when you're stationary in neutral, and another much bigger and bassier note as soon as you put it in gear. So it romps through a stationary noise test, but it's loud enough to set off the odd car alarm when you're riding it. Very Italian. Take a look. Acceleration at full throttle happens at the speed of thought, and the 52% forward weight distribution does an amazing job of keeping the front wheel planted, even if you're brave enough to open up full throttle in first gear and hang onto it until the 14,000 RPM red line. That translates to a bit over 140 k's an hour, with brutal hammering drive building from around 50 k's an hour to a screaming peak around 130. 180 horsepower, and the RSV4's instant and twitchy power delivery in track mode, is utter overkill for street riding. If you're used to the instant massive torque of a Ducati 1198, you might find the RSV4's power a touch more accessible. But for most riders, what lies behind the Aprilia's electronic throttle is going to come as a rude shock. Power that feels joyously excessive exploding out of a fast sweeper, feels caged and frustrated around town, and it's a constant battle keeping the RSV4 on a leash when you're faced with stifling urban speed limits. Selecting the 140 horsepower road mode by thumbing the starter button on a closed throttle actually makes sense on a city commute. The throttle response is smoother and the power delivery much less insane. Of course, you won't use it because track mode's absolute power will corrupt you absolutely the minute you manage to get your brain calibrated to deal with the acceleration. That took me a little while, during which I was very glad that I'd packed the brown underpants. But leave it in track mode at your own peril. The Beamer Superbike might have traction control and race ABS, but there's none of that here, so you can't go running to mummy if your throttle hand writes checks that your riding talent can't cash. So road mode is a nice practical consideration, and practicalities are few and far between with this thoroughbred race machine. It's an exotic to die for on the track and an absolute weapon in the twisties, but it doesn't give a stuff what else you want a road bike for. Part of the problem with packing so much performance into such a tiny space is that there's nowhere for the engine heat to go. As a result, the RSV4 is without question the hottest running bike I've ever ridden. You can feel it through full leathers, cruising at 100 k's an hour in top gear on a mild day. Stop at a set of traffic lights and the air around you shimmers and distorts in the haze like you're sitting on a World Superbike grid. Ride the RSV4 in traffic and it will bake your spuds until they're golden brown. There's a comedy-sized pillion seat, which I'll describe in the words of my fiancée, who hopped off the bike looking rather pale and said, "That seat doesn't want to be your friend, it just wants to penetrate." I suspect most owners will swap it for the much better looking rear cowl and get rid of the pillion foot pegs to clean up the rear end. Then again, it's almost worth taking passengers just so you can see the look on their faces when they get off. A Speedo's hard to read in the daytime because the sun reflects off the top triple clamp and cuts your magic number in half. And if you take the time to thumb your way through the impressive trip computer, you'll be horrified to discover how much fuel the V4 goes through. Often more than 10 litres per 100 kilometres when you're going for it, and at least 6 to 7 even if you're behaving yourself and cruising on the freeway. Combined with a smallish 17-litre tank, you'll rarely see 200 kilometres from a fill-up, and the fuel warning light pops up as early as 130 k's into a ride if you're getting a bit happy with the throttle, which you will. Having said that, regular fuel stops are a welcome chance to catch your breath after such a wild ride as this. You might want to do a bit of base jumping at the end of the day just to help you calm down. And there you have it, the classic Italian sports bike dilemma. The Aprilia RSV4 is a highly strung beast, an expert rider's bike with a completely uncompromising racetrack focus. Bin the mirrors, the passenger accommodation and the rear fender, a process which takes all of 10 minutes, and you've got a brilliant track bike ready to take you around Mugello as fast as anything on the market. Ride it to work and you'll get the kind of punishment you deserve for trying to make a wild stallion do dressage. Ride it like it demands to be ridden, and your license will explode in a puff of pure joy as you break every law in the land. At least you'll have the memories. I sure do. The factory version, with all the chassis adjustment options and gorgeous Öhlins suspension at either end, comes in at about a 25% price premium over the RSV4R. But if you can deal with the slightly less glamorous suspension on the R version, you're still getting the full experience of that magnificent motor, fly-by-wire electronics, obscenely good looks, and one of the best handling road race machines you can buy. That's the option I'd be taking. It's a magnificent feat of engineering, a welcome tonic to the tide of inline 4s and V-twins, and a wonderfully excessive machine. It just warms my heart to know that in this low-fat world of occupational health and safety, abrogated personal responsibility and ever-dwindling speeding tolerances, you can still march into an Aprilia dealer today and walk out with a 300 kilometres an hour, 180 horsepower road missile like the RSV4 for half the price of a family car. It's one of the purest forms of exhilaration and heart-pumping adrenaline that I've ever experienced, and without having ridden the new BMW, I'm still confident to say it's a genuine contender for the best open-class supersports bike of 2010. But make no mistake, as an everyday bike, it's bloody awful.